Sing to me of the man, O Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course. Once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. He suffered many pains, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life, to bring his comrades home. But he could not save them, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. His name was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, hero of Troy, and he had been trying to get home for 10 years. Before the voyage, before the monsters and the gods and the wreckage of ships, there was a man, a husband, a father, a king. Odysseus had a wife named Penelope, patient, brilliant, fierce in her own quiet way. He had a son, Telemachus, barely an infant when the war began. He had a kingdom. He had, by any measure, everything worth protecting. The war at Troy had lasted 10 years. 10 years of blood and dust and fire, while the women of Greece waited and the children grew up without their fathers. When Troy finally fell, through Odysseus's own cunning, the hollow horse that carried soldiers into the city's heart, the Greeks believed their suffering was over. The gods of Olympus had watched the war with interest, some siding with Greece, some with Troy, all of them willing to intervene when it suited them. And when the Greeks sailed home in triumph, they carried with them the seeds of divine anger. Poseidon, god of the sea, hated Odysseus. The reasons were personal. Odysseus had blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, who happened to be Poseidon's son. The god of the seas does not forgive insults to his children. And so, as Odysseus sailed home to Ithaca, a journey that should have taken weeks, Poseidon ensured it would take something far longer. 10 years of wandering, 10 years of loss. The first great temptation was the gentlest, and perhaps for that reason, the most dangerous. The island of the Lotus Eaters seemed like paradise. The inhabitants were not violent. They offered the sailors food, the lotus flower, with open hands and empty smiles. Those who ate the lotus forgot everything, forgot the war, forgot Ithaca, forgot their wives and their children and their names. They sat on the shore and stared at the sea with perfect, contented vacancy. Odysseus dragged them back to the ships by force, weeping, resisting. He understood something the Lotus Eaters did not. That comfort, when it costs you your purpose, is not comfort at all. It was the first of many times Odysseus would have to choose between ease and home. The encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus was something different entirely. Not temptation, but terror. The Cyclops was a giant, a creature of raw, unthinking power. He ate 2 of Odysseus's men for dinner, 2 more for breakfast, and Odysseus, trapped behind a stone that 10 men could not move, had to think his way out. He sharpened a stake. He got the Cyclops drunk on wine, and when the monster fell into a stupor, Odysseus drove the stake into his single eye. But the escape required one final stroke of cunning. When the blinded Cyclops threw open the cave to let his sheep out, the Greeks clung to the animal's undersides. Invisible to the creature's grasping hands, they were free. And Odysseus, standing at the stern of his ship, made a mistake that would cost him dearly. He shouted his name. It was I, Odysseus, son of Laertes of Ithaca, who blinded you. Pride. A single moment of pride, and Poseidon heard every word. Not all of Odysseus's enemies were monstrous. Some were beautiful. Circe was a goddess, or a witch, depending on who you asked. She welcomed the sailors with food and wine, and then she turned them into pigs. Odysseus, warned by the god Hermes, arrived at her hall with a divine herb that protected him from her magic. When Circe's spell failed, she did something unexpected. She surrendered. She restored his men. She became, for a time, his lover. A year passed on Circe's island, a year of warmth and forgetting. It was Odysseus's men who finally reminded him of what he had lost sight of. Captain, remember Ithaca, the same temptation as the lotus, a different flower, the same choice. Circe, before she let him leave, gave Odysseus a gift and a warning. To find his way home, he must first descend to the edge of the underworld, the land of the dead, and speak with the prophet Tiresias. What followed was perhaps the most haunting passage of the entire journey. The dead came, drawn by the blood of the sacrifice. Kings and heroes and ordinary men, all of them reduced to flitting shades, hungry for a moment of presence. Odysseus spoke with Achilles, the hero who had chosen a short, glorious life over a long and quiet one. And Achilles, in the land of the dead, said something Odysseus would never forget. "Do not speak to me of death with comfort. I would rather be a slave above ground than king of all the dead." Even the greatest glory, Achilles had learned, means nothing without the living world to inhabit it. And then he saw his mother. She had died while he was away. She had not known if he was alive or dead. She had simply waited, and then stopped waiting. 3 times he tried to embrace her. 3 times his arms closed on nothing. The sea offered no mercy. Between the island of the Sirens, whose song drove sailors to steer their ships onto the rocks in a trance of longing, and the whirlpool of Charybdis that could swallow a ship whole, Odysseus navigated a passage that seemed designed by the gods to be impossible. He had ordered his men to plug their ears with wax. He alone listened, tied to the mast, unable to act on what he heard. He heard the most beautiful sound in the world, and survived it, just barely, choosing between Scylla, a 6-headed monster on one cliff, and Charybdis, a whirlpool that would destroy the entire ship. Odysseus chose Scylla. He said nothing to his men. 6 men died. He had calculated that 6 deaths were preferable to all of them. He was right. He would carry it the rest of his life. Tiresias had warned him. Circe had warned him. The instruction was simple and absolute. Do not touch the cattle of Helios, god of the sun. They were stranded for a month. The winds refused to blow. The food ran out. And Odysseus's men, exhausted, starving, pushed beyond endurance, made the decision that would kill them all. While Odysseus slept, they slaughtered and ate the sacred cattle. When they finally put to sea, the sky turned black. The lightning came from nowhere. The ship was struck and shattered. Every plank, every rope, every man, Odysseus alone survived, clinging to broken timber, carried by the current, back through the strait, back past Charybdis, which spat the wreckage out like a seed, and onto the shore of a distant island. He had warned them. He had begged them. He was the only one left. The current carried him to the island of Ogygia, to the nymph Calypso. Calypso was not cruel. She was, by any measure, generous. She healed him. She fed him. She loved him in her way. And she offered him something no mortal had ever been offered before. Stay with me. I will make you immortal. You will never grow old, never suffer, never die. He stayed 7 years. Not willingly. He was, in some sense, her prisoner, but also not entirely against his will. The man who had survived so much had, perhaps, simply run out of strength to fight. Every day, he sat at the water's edge and wept. Wept for Ithaca, for Penelope, for a life that was still, somewhere, his. 7 years. It was Athena, goddess of wisdom, Odysseus's divine champion, who finally moved the gods to act. In an assembly on Olympus while Poseidon was away, she presented the case for Odysseus plainly. A good man, a just king, a faithful husband, or as faithful as the ancient world required. He had suffered enough. He deserved to go home. The god Hermes descended to Ogygia with an order: release him. Calypso, to her credit, obeyed. She helped Odysseus build a raft. She gave him food, wine, and a fair wind. And she said something to him before he left that stopped him in his tracks. If you knew what suffering still waits for you before you reach your home, you would stay here with me. And yet, I know you will not. He sailed, anyway, after 20 years away. 10 at war, 10 at sea, Odysseus finally set foot on Ithaca. He did not recognize it at first, or perhaps he was afraid to. The goddess Athena disguised him as a beggar, ragged, aged, unrecognizable, because the palace of Ithaca was no longer a safe place. In his absence, over 100 suitors had descended on his home, lords and young nobles from across the islands, each one claiming that Penelope should choose a new husband, each one eating through Odysseus's stores, drinking his wine, treating his palace as their own. And Penelope, faithful, brilliant Penelope, had held them off for years with a trick. She told them she would choose a husband when she finished weaving a funeral shroud for Odysseus's father. Every night, she unraveled what she had woven that day. She had been waiting 20 years. She had never stopped believing, almost. The contest Penelope devised was elegant in its simplicity, and impossible for any man but one. She would marry whoever could string Odysseus's great bow, a weapon so powerful that none of the suitors had ever managed to bend it, and shoot an arrow through the rings of 12 axe heads lined up in a row. Then the old beggar in the corner asked to try. He took it up. He bent it easily. He strung it with one smooth motion, the way a musician strings a lyre. Then he nocked an arrow, aimed. The room went very quiet. Then the killing began. When it was over, Penelope came down. She had been told what happened. She had been told her husband had returned. She walked into the hall and looked at this man, this scarred, aged, war-worn man, and she did not run to him. 20 years of waiting had taught her caution. She had been deceived before. She would not be deceived again. Move our bed out of the bedchamber. Make it up for him in the hall. Only one person in the world could have said those words as a test, because only 2 people knew the secret of that bed. Odysseus had built it himself, carved it from a living olive tree that grew at the palace's heart. It could not be moved. It was rooted in the earth. Who has moved the bed? No man alive could move it. I built it with my own hands. It is rooted, unless someone has cut away the trunk. She wept. He wept. The great sea rover, the man who had faced monsters and gods and the edge of death itself, wept on the floor of his own palace with his wife's arms around him. The Odyssey is, on its surface, an adventure story. Monsters, magic, gods, war. But it has endured for nearly 3,000 years because it is also something else entirely. It is the story of what it costs to remain yourself. Every island Odysseus landed on offered him a version of forgetting, pleasure, ease, immortality, the chance to be someone other than the man trying to get home. And every time, he chose the harder road. Not because the harder road was better in any simple sense, but because it was his. Because Ithaca, with all its uncertainty, its age, its ordinariness, was where he belonged. And Penelope, often overlooked in retellings, always central to the story, is the other half of that meaning. She fought her own war with thread instead of bronze. She held a kingdom together with intelligence and patience and a grief she never allowed to become despair. Homer sang this story to audiences who had not yet invented the novel, the film, the podcast. They sat in darkness and listened, and they recognized, in Odysseus's struggle, something they all knew, the feeling of being far from where you are meant to be. The long, difficult, beautiful, costly work of finding your way back.